Great. Yeah, I think we can start letting people in. Okay, welcome everyone coming in just now. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I think we're expecting quite a few people, so hopefully people will start coming in drips and drabs. So today's webinar, as you can see from the screen, is about developing business models and financing community-led projects. So you are in the right place if that's what you signed up for. I think I'm just going to give it maybe a couple more minutes before getting going, just to allow people to come in. So, all right, I think I'm going to get started. So yeah, welcome everybody. My name is Megan and I'm hosting today's webinar. I work for the Centre for Sustainable Energy and I'm joined here by my colleague Lucy, who's on the call, who will be sort of managing the chat and providing some tech support today. So this webinar is part of the Northwest Community Energy Pathways programme, which is funded by the Northwest Net Zero Hub and delivered by CAG Consultants and the Centre for Sustainable Energy. The whole programme supports the community energy sector in the Northwest, both through providing expertise and sharing best practice. However, we are welcoming organisations from across the UK today. I know there's not just Northwest groups, so welcome, everyone's welcome, and we're really happy to have you here. So today's session is about business models and financing community-led projects, which is definitely a very broad topic and full disclosure, not a topic that I know massive amounts about. So I'm really happy that I'm joined here by some experts in their field. So today we're going to hear from Energy for All. So Zach is going to talk to us about Energy for All and what they do and sort of different models that we might encounter in the community energy world. And then I'm going to hand over to Kira and Bruce and Matt to talk about the Project Collette Project and Green Finance Community Hub CIC. So this will be sort of providing a longer talk looking in depth at the Project Collette offshore wind turbine initiative that's getting going there. So we're really excited to have these speakers on board. Just a quick note that we'll pause after each speaker for questions, but if you've got any questions whilst the presentations are happening, you can pop them in the chat and Lucy is going to collate those. You can also, in the question time, raise your hand and come off mute, and it's fairly informal here, so feel free to do that. Yeah, hopefully will be a good session. So that's the agenda. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand straight over to Zach to begin the session today. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now, Zach.
See if this lets me.
Yep, that works.
Excellent. Just reshuffle everything on my screen so I can see what's going on. Sorry, I lost all of you for a minute there. So my name is Zach and I work for Energy for All. We are best described as a co-op of co-ops, I think. So it's 35 community energy organisations, kind of all sharing a back office and project development staff. But they're all independent organisations. They can leave, they join, various things do happen, but generally we're all working together with a shared back office, which is actually up in Barrow. So northwest box ticked, I think. And this is a few of the organisations. On the left-hand side, you've got Baywind, which was the kind of original one back in the 90s. It was a wind turbine co-op, which has now been repowered. And then we have Ground Mount Solar, some other wind sites, and hydro. And this tree diagram, which isn't coming out terribly well, there's too many co-ops and BenComs now to get it on one diagram very easily. But you can see they're spread all across the country, from right on the south coast all the way up to Kinlochbervie, which is a very, very long way north up there up in Scotland. That is a very remote area, but they got great community support for that one. As you'd imagine, hydro and wind is clustered up in Scotland. Solar tends to be down in England a lot more, although Edinburgh does have a big solar project as well. So I think the first thing, which hopefully you've all got some ideas about, is what is community ownership? And we would expect a community would invest capital somehow. However you're raising it, the community should be investing into the project. And then there should be some kind of democratic control from the members. This might be minor, especially if you're a minor stakeholder in a project, but there needs to be something. Ideally, if it's a wholly owned project, and the members have the final say. And the community must benefit from the project. The community in each of these lines can be slightly different. So the one that benefits will tend to be the local community. Be quite local to the projects. Although when you get to a project like Project Collette, I expect that might be challenging because of the scale. So what is local? So the four kind of broad types of project we deal with are revenue share projects, joint ventures, split ownership, and wholly owned. And most of our more recent projects have been wholly owned. It's definitely much simpler if you can raise the money. So revenue share projects, generally a partnership with a developer, where the money is raised and given to the developer pretty much for a contract to share the returns on the project. In the background there, you can see Spirit of Lanarkshire, which is one of our original ones that was done with Folk. Energy Fool has done, I think it's about 7 or 8 projects with Folk now, across Scotland. And they're revenue share ones. So we don't physically own the turbines, but we are a partner in the project, and the investors get a return through that. The next one would be a joint venture, where the community would own part of the kind of SPV, or the entity, whichever entity actually owns the project. So a developer might have a project and they want to bring some local ownership into it, but they don't want to give up too much control, or the community might not want too much control, of course. And you can end up with a joint venture where the project is kind of joint owned by the community and either the developer or someone else. You do get more say than with a revenue share, so there is more risk and potentially more reward. In the background is one of our Highland Community Energy projects, where we have a share of 5 different hydro schemes along with the original developer. So we raise part of the money to help fund them. See lots of questions coming in.
There is just quickly, I think somebody's just asking what SPV is.
A special purpose vehicle, so a company, BenCom or co-op that's been formed just to run one project. It's often used on a project like this to compartmentalize them. So the Highland one in the background, there's 5 different hydro schemes. If there's a problem at one, you don't necessarily want it impacting the other ones, and it just keeps it very clean to have it as a single BenCom cooperative company, whatever you choose to use. especially with bigger projects. That tends to be the way most people do it. The next option is split ownership, which is getting a lot more complicated. I've heard of it with solar farms, but it often involves separate SPVs used by the developer and the community. So the advantage there is that if the developer decides to sell up, they're not going to affect you that much. The disadvantage is that often means things like separate finance agreements, separate planning will be required at some point, and separate grid connections, which may be a benefit. You may wish to have that much control and that much input, but it's going to be, again, a bit riskier than simpler options. But we don't have any split ownership projects at the moment. If anyone knows of any, stick it in the chat so we can have a look at some pictures of them. Something like a solar farm with an odd bit sticking out on one end, that's the kind of thing that might end up in split ownership. They give a few megawatts to the community. And the next option is kind of wholly owned. So either a co-op or a cooperative society or a community benefit society, where there's no other partners involved, or at least there's no other partners with ownership involved. So you're going to be raising all of the funding yourselves. That could be share offers, bonds, grants, loans, and whatever else you can think of. Can be a very long lead time, especially if it's a kind of a big wind project or a big hydro project. They can take years, sometimes decades before they actually go ahead. But it's common with multi-site projects. In the background, you can see the Baths Hall, which is over in Scunthorpe. And that's one of the sites with North Lincolnshire Community Energy. And that's wholly owned by the members, although we did get some grant support to start with, but the grant doesn't have any kind of ownership. It just helps to start everything off. Okay, so once you've raised lots of money and you've built something big, fancy and shiny, you're going to need to be getting some kind of income from it. So the main ways that we get the incomes are export payments, behind the meter, multi-site, local supply and heat. And if anyone has a good heat project, let me know, because it is quite challenging at the moment. So for the export sites, we're looking at rather large installations. In the background, you can see the 5 megawatt Westmill solar, and that would very much struggle to be built today without a kind of feed-in tariff or other support. It's too small, it's too expensive. Export payments are too low. You need to be going much bigger if you're going to build an export-only project at the moment. Wind sites, and you see Westmill Wind is in the background. They kind of share a grid connection on this site, and that's a 6 megawatt wind farm. They also require quite a few megawatts, but they're very site dependent. Solar panels tend to work, as long as they're facing south, reasonably well across the country, a bit better on the south coast, not as well the further north you get. And the east coast is always sunny, which doesn't help you a lot in the northwest. But wind turbines are very dependent on location. If you've got a good windy site, it could work very well. But if you put the turbine in the wrong place, it's certainly not going to work on export. Hydro is challenging now. We're kind of geography limited eventually. We've done a lot of the easier hydro. There'll be some opportunities left, but it's expensive. It's a very long lead time. And yeah, without support, it's going to be challenging. Battery storage is being co-located with wind and solar increasingly. I don't fully understand the economic models for them, the income and the capital costs. I'm not quite sure how they're working, but people are doing it, so I hope they know what they're doing. The behind the meter sites, if you can find a large site with a behind the meter project, then every kilowatt hour you generate can offset a kilowatt hour from the grid. And that is an awful lot more valuable than when you're exporting it to the grid and they're paying you for that. So we're getting under 10p on export at the moment, whereas someone who's importing power is often paying 20, 25p. So that's a much more viable business model. In the background here is Dundee Renewable Energy Society, which we had our first handover meeting this morning. These are the bare frames. The panels are now on, all 5,000 of them. So it's a 2.6 megawatts behind the meter ground mount solar. If you can find a site where you can do a hydro or wind behind the meter, that's amazing. Either of those would work in a lot of places, but it's going to be geography and planning limited, unfortunately. Solar is far more likely to be possible. And the excess can still be exported. So even if the site won't use all of your power, or if you're saying putting a wind turbine on a factory and they're shut down at night, you can still export at night. Multi-site projects, and this is mainly what I work on. We're doing multiple rooftops, kind of just constant stream of development. They're behind the meter, so we're offsetting imported power, which is much more valuable than just exporting power. Again, it's mostly solar. You could find some small wind in some places, but it's going to be expensive, and big wind turbines are an awful lot better than small ones. Excess can be exported, but I don't know if any of you have tried, but getting export can be a challenging process. We have just succeeded on a batch in North Lincolnshire, but there's some that are taking a very, very long time to get through the export process. It's and there are political questions about why it takes so long. One option which might happen in the future is complex sites. Where we're talking about supplying to local customers, or maybe not local. Some people are trying to do it nationwide. So the obvious ones are Energy Local, Urban Chain, Octopus Fan Club, and Ripple. Ripple are the nationwide one. The Octopus Fan Club gives you cheaper power when your local wind turbine is generating. And Energy Local, you can see the graph in the background. And they had an awful lot of rain in Wales over the last few days, and that's why it all turns blue at the end, because they're all getting cheap power. It's great. There's huge potential there. It's just very complicated. We don't know how the regulations are going to change, so I would find it very difficult to kind of run a share offer on those models at the moment. But especially if you've got a constrained grid in your area, then a local generator supplying local power might be just what's needed. It could avoid needing grid upgrades in the future, which could have a huge environmental impact. And lastly, heat. In the background, that is Springbok Wood Heat. It supplies a care home and about 20 houses, all owned by the care home, but they're kind of a row of cottages along the road. It's a very high capex project, and it's got seasonal demand. And if you've got huge expensive equipment not doing anything, then you're not going to be making any money. And it's demand led. So when we have a warm winter, this project does not do very well. If you have a cold, windy winter, then it will do much better. If you can find an anchor load, such as a swimming pool or a factory wanting process heat, that's very useful. Exporting heat, it can only go so far. If anyone's ever seen a district heating system being installed, the pipework is expensive and very disruptive. You're digging a big trench, kind of a meter deep at least, even for a small pipe. So you're not going to be exporting it a very long way. And everyone that kind of joins in as a customer, they're going to need to be quite committed, because it is going to be a big undertaking. And then also you need effective billing systems, and there's additional regulation when you're supplying heat. If you're the only heat supplier to the premises, then they want to regulate you because there have been some horror stories in the past. Getting domestic sign-ups, if you're not dealing with a kind of single landlord or owner in some way, then getting individuals to sign up for various reasons can be challenging. They may not be interested, they may not like your technology, they may have just installed a new boiler or air source heat pump themselves, so they don't want to rip out that good equipment. One thing worth looking for is free or cheap heat opportunities. There are companies around the country with either processes that have excess heat or people wanting to put in something like a greenhouse where they're desperate for extra heat. So there might be a good opportunity when you can get some of it supplied for free. But currently, without any kind of capital or renewable heat incentive support, you're going to struggle to run a heat project, I think. But do let me know if you find one. There will be places where they do work. So options for fundraising. Grants, see that's the best one because you don't have to pay them back. Crowdfunding, again, generally you don't need to pay it back. Community share offer, this is where Energy for All raises the vast majority of our money. We have nearly 20,000 people as members of various projects, so we can go out to a large community of people to raise more money. And then community loan or bond offers, so maybe you only need some money for 5 years rather than 20, 25 years that the share offer might last for. Another option is to go to commercial lending, and you might do a community bond and then go to commercial lending after 5 years once the project has proved itself. Banks are much happier if you have a project and a refinancing rather than you've got some pieces of paper and an idea and maybe a hole in the ground. It doesn't look as good when they're trying to get their money back. You've then got organisations like Thrive for business bridging finance, again, similar to a short-term bond offer. And then another thing that Energy for All does quite a lot is we kind of lend money within the co-ops and BenComs within Energy for All. So I said about North Lincolnshire Community Energy, we're going out for a share offer very soon. I saw the designed version yesterday, but we've already built some of the projects that will be funding because we could borrow some money from another co-op. This is going to be a bit more negative on this slide. There's very little subsidy left. At large scale, there are contracts for difference. Is that a subsidy or not is a question. There are REGOs, the Renewable Energy Guarantee of Origin. Some people consider them to be greenwashing, but you do get paid for them, so you can make up your own mind on that one. If you're dealing with a big project, then you're going to need some project management experience or support. Energy for All, we have in-house project managers for most projects, but if we get to a very large one, then we'll bring in external project managers as well. You might have people in your organisation who can do everything, or you might not. So just check what your capabilities are, and learn from others. Community energy is a global industry really, but especially in the UK, it is very active. There are lots of people happy to talk and learn. And when you're starting, it's always worth considering kind of long-term future developments as well. Are you going to be building one solar farm, or are you going to do a solar farm and then look for rooftop solar in your area? Is there wind potentially? Or are you going to do 100 rooftop solar projects one at a time, which can get quite admin heavy? And on that note, if you're doing a 20, 25-year project, maybe 35, 40 years for some projects, hydro is very long term. Where's the admin? Where's the maintenance work going to come from? You might have it all in your organisation at the moment, but you don't want to be relying on one accountant volunteering for 20, 30 years. You need some kind of succession planning in there. And it's worth thinking about local ownership versus nationwide ownership. is it just local people getting involved? If it's say a solar farm looking at a revenue share, maybe just local ownership is quite appropriate. It's the people being immediately impacted. If you're trying to get a multi-million-pound wind farm going, or Project Collette, then you might be looking at something more nationwide. You might be wanting everyone involved, anyone and all their friends to chip in, because if you're raising many millions, you're not going to raise it locally in many places in this country, especially not the ones that can take wind turbines or solar farms, because there's just not many people in them. Thank you for listening. Did we have any questions?
Thanks, Zach. We've got just about 10 minutes for questions. I think there was a couple in the chat. Lucy, have you been able to?
Yeah, so John Hall said there's a lot of co-ops in Scotland, and is this because obtaining planning permission is easier there?
It's not that the planning is easier. There has been a bit more government support, 100 grand loans for project development work, write-offable loans. So a lot of projects that maybe were there, maybe weren't, got the 100 grand loan. If the project didn't go ahead, it got written off. So a lot of groups took them out, and plenty of projects did come out of them. Another thing is it's windier and wetter up in Scotland, and they have bigger hills. So for hydro and wind, it's just a better place to put them. If you're trying to put hydros anywhere down in England, you're going to struggle unless you're in the Lake District. There's just not many places that work.
Okay, and then the other question was from Brian Drysdale, going over to Wales now. So something they've been discussing in Wales is, how do we define community energy? Can you define community?
No, and on this slide at the start, I think community means slightly different things each time. Certainly the ones that benefit from the project immediately are not necessarily the ones that are going to be investing the capital. And the ones that have a say over the project, while everyone has it, not all of them will use it. So you'll have a kind of an active group normally within a project. There'll be more silent investors, there'll be the locals, and depending on how you want to distribute community benefits, then some other people may be benefiting. Yeah, and it gets more difficult when you're looking at the big projects like the offshore wind. The simplest one we've got is the heating project, because it's very simple. It's on a care home. The immediate community is the residents in the care home. If anyone has a better definition of community, please do put it in the chat.
Are there any more questions from anyone? Because there's nothing else in the chat that I can see.
I see Dave has just put in, now talk about owned on behalf of the community. Yeah, a community benefit society isn't going to be everyone in any community, although the one up in the top of Scotland, not Burby, that came very close to having everyone in. I think that. And thanks to John Hall, Wally Hydro in Lancashire. There's always going to be one or two places, but geography is not on your side in England. The northwest is obviously better than the rest of it. Where I'm doing rooftop solar down in the south of England, there'll be very, very few places to put a hydro. It's an awful lot better up in Scotland, where you can have 100 to 200 metre high heads to run the turbines.
Okay, there's one other question there from Errol Edwards. Is Oxford Low Carbon Hub in your group? Seems a good model.
We work with them, especially on the West Mills that you saw in the pictures earlier. They are in Oxfordshire, both the wind and solar farm. So yeah, we work quite closely with Mary and the rest at Low Carbon Hub.
Any more? Oh, another question. Who owns the panels? This is from Ned. Who owns the panels in a rooftop solar scheme across several houses? And what happens when the resident moves?
We don't have any domestic rooftop solar projects. They're mostly on schools, although there's a few kind of council buildings, warehouses and cathedrals in there as well. There's a license or a lease agreement, and depending on how it's written, which you can write what you like in, agree it with whoever's in there at the time, and landlords if it's a rented building. Normally it would just stay in place, and the new residents or the new tenants, as it would be with a commercial building, will take on the agreement, especially once they see the terms. These are normally quite good deals for the site. They're getting cheap electricity when it's available, and the rest of the time they're using the grid as normal. So there's not much downside really, and very few people would want to come in and remove an existing successful rooftop solar system off a building. And we do have buyout clauses as well. So if someone does want to demolish a building or sell it without having the additional legal work, then they're entitled to buy it out. But we find residential scale is very challenging. Just on the admin, partly, the back office work does not scale up very quickly. If you're dealing with a 5 kilowatt system to a 100 kilowatt system, it's a similar amount of work.
Okay. Another question has just popped in from Errol Edwards. Do you have a risk assessment model that can be shared for multiple sites?
Do you want to unmute, Errol? What do you mean by that?
Double checkers. When everyone earlier starts with P.
I think somebody's accidentally unmuted. I'm just gonna mute them, Shelley. Okay. Errol, do you want to unmute yourself?
If you're talking about kind of financial risks, then they tend to be lower than for a single site. We're dealing with, say, with the schools energy co-op, we've got over 100 sites now, so there's no single wire in the country that can take them all out at once. There's probably 200, 250 inverters in there across several different brands, so the risk has thoroughly been spread over the portfolio, whereas a single site project, one storm can knock it out. If it's a hydro, then you can have landslides and things like that. Wind turbines, things do go wrong. But if you've got 10, 20 solar roofs, that's going to be a lot more robust. Hopefully that answers your question, Errol, but the risks seem to reduce for multi-sites rather than increase.
Okay, I think we've exhausted all the questions by looks of it.
Thank you so much, Zach. That was a really helpful introduction and overview. So I think we're going to hand over now to Kira. Zach, if you just want to unshare your screen, and then Kira, you should be able to share yours.
Hello, everyone. So I pressed share screen. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see your sort of notes, the full PowerPoint rather than just the slides. So if you just start the presentation, we should be able to see that.
Okay, can you see a slide that has on the front developing Project Colette's business model? That should be what you're looking at.
Yeah, we can. We can also see your notes as well, though.
Oh, I didn't realize I have some. Okay.
No, if you just click start presentation.
Start presentation, I can't see that button.
So just at the top where there's that little square and the little play sign on it, top left.
Top left.
Yeah, or you just passed it. Yeah, it's So it's on the top bar. It's an icon that's, yeah, it's got a little square and a little play button on it. If you to the right, yeah, that one. If you could just click that.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, is that all right?
I think it's probably opened up on a have you got two monitors, Kira?
No, I've only got one.
Okay, if you just if you stop sharing your screen and then reshare it, hopefully we can see the slides, because at the moment we could still see your notes.
Okay. Ooh, what is going on? I don't know what's going on now. Sorry about this. This,
What
of
happens
course,
if you click share your screen again?
share screen again. Well, the presentation doesn't seem to be on there.
Okay.
Entire screen. Oh dear. So what happened? I'm really sorry, everybody. This is a nightmare.
Kira, if you want to pop your slides over to my email, I can share my screen if you're having problems, if you send them over to me as an attachment.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay, I'll
everybody.
do that.
Just give us one moment.
Any more questions for Zach while we're waiting?
I'm a crap typist, so I'll come up. I'll chip in on audio if that's okay. I was wondering if you had any other top tips for getting schools signed up. So I've got a well-sited primary school where I am. I'm just at the early stages, so I was wondering if there's any sort of top advice for engaging with them and going through the process.
Having someone who knows the school directly or knows someone in the school is always very helpful. With the Schools Industry Co-op, a lot of our work is by referral, either by teachers who know each other or teachers moving school. If we do a school, then the teacher moves on to somewhere else and they say, why don't we do this again?
If you're looking at schools, it might well be worth finding out if they're part of a multi-academy trust as well. So approaching the governors. So I speak as an ex-governor of the local primary school. So approaching the governors, if it's a multi-academy trust, approaching the multi-academy trust, those are all good options.
That's probably our second biggest source, is kind of repeat customers in the form of a multi-academy trust. We do one and then they keep bringing more sites to us. The diocese as well, if you're looking at the church schools, some of them are good, some of them are very unhelpful. It seems to be changing. They do seem to be turning around, but the church does not move quickly. And councils can be a good option as well, if they want to be.
I'll go for the governor first. One of the governors is my brother-in-law, so I can I'll lean on him. But thank you very much. Appreciate those advices.
If you're going for a secondaries,
there's a comment in the chat too, Kieran. Sorry. There's a comment in the chat as well. Schools can use these projects as a teaching tool as well as saving money. And this is from Graham Simons, their local head teacher is very excited by the project.
I've been into all the schools we've installed on in Scunthorpe. We've done a session either with the Eco Committee up to the whole school assemblies. So, and the kids know what they're talking about now. It's very much changed in the last 20, 30 years. They might not know what a solar panel was. These days, they know everything.
Okay, thank you for that, Zach. I'm just checking in with Kira again. I haven't received your slides, Kira. I don't know if you've tried to email them to me. Or can we try you sharing again?
Yes, I did email them to you, but let me just try sharing again.
If you clicked start presentation, it might be that a new window has opened up. So when you click share screen, you might just need to share a different window.
Okay. This is... So say that again. Has it not come through to you, Megan?
No, I haven't received an email from you yet. I don't know, maybe it's because the file was too big. Really apologies to everybody for this, but I'm just wondering, Kira, if you clicked start presentation, it might be that your presentation opened in a different window. So when you click share screen,
yeah,
it should come up with the different application windows. So if you just click share screen, you should have sort of different windows that you can share, and your slide deck should be one of those windows.
Yeah, I know it was before, but no, it's not coming up. So
is your PowerPoint open?
Yes, it's open. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe just try closing your PowerPoint entirely again, and then just reopening it and trying again.
I mean, we could do this without showing the screen. That would be one way, because
it looks like Bruce is sharing something. There you go. Look, yeah, that's it there.
Okay, great. So great. Thank you very much, Bruce. I'm really sorry about that, everyone. I had a look at some of the people in the audience, and one of them I know, which is Dave Green. I remember having a very good conversation with you. So just to quickly introduce us. So we are the Green Finance Community Hub. We're a community interest company established 25th of May 2022. The presentation today, it will be done by myself. I'm sort of founding director of the hub. We have two other directors. Matt Bleasdale, he's with Poseidon Services, and he has done for us the feasibility study, the finance model, and the finance strategy. And then we have Bruce Davis, and he is the non-executive director of Abundance Investments. And then to go with our sort of quartet, we also have a gentleman called Mark Francis, who's an investment director. And it's been great having these different types of brains to sort of think through how we can turn a sizable asset, 1.2 gigawatts offshore wind farm, into a community asset. And it's quite interesting looking at some of the chat, you know, what is the definition of community energy? What's the definition of community? Well, we've been thinking about, well, what is the definition of community owned? Should we say community led? But we'll go into those details in a minute. So we have literally just produced our report, which looks at the way that we will fund Project Collette. And I can send a link to you. And just to say, without adding an excuse, the graphic designer actually fell over on Sunday in the snow. So there are a few typos, but we'll get those resolved quite soon. So offshore wind, it really is the backbone of the future energy system. And it was described quite recently as the only technology available to really get us to deliver clean power by 2030. It really needs to start coming online in record pace. Now, the UK has already about 14.7 gigawatts of operational offshore wind, second only to China. But what's in the pipeline? So if you go to the Crown Estate, for example, they will tell you what's in the pipeline. So that means under construction, what's committed. Now, there is a sizable amount. Look at that, 93 gigawatts. However, the recent challenges, the rising costs of electricity, the CFD issues, which I think Matt may go into, it has slightly slowed the progress
Sure.
with having so much offshore wind coming through the
Sorry.
system. Next slide, please.
I can tell you.
Sorry, someone needs to mute, maybe Shelley. So how did Project Collette begin? Well, it was really quite simple. A few words as an alternative to the Cumbrian coal mine. So we did a green investment plan for Cumbria. We worked with Arup. They had already thought about some of these ideas around Project Collette. And this then became the sort of transformative alternative to the Cumbrian coal mine. But it really became quite evident that coal mine or no coal mine, having a community-owned offshore wind farm at this scale was really an important thing to do. Originally, we did include green hydrogen, but we haven't yet included that in this way that we're going about it. So if you're thinking about a finance model or a business model, just thinking about the title of this, we have so far, as I've said, we've done a concept study, which Arup did. We've done a feasibility study, which Matt did, a finance model, a finance strategy, and then also a community finance paper. Next steps for us, we will be doing a business plan that will go to the likes of GB Energy, the Crown Estate, Sellafield, and then other sort of key off-takers. So Cumbria, for those that know, we all know it rains a huge amount here. But there's also lots of wind, and there are already 1.383 gigawatts of installed offshore wind along the Cumbrian coast. And in 2020, that amounted to around 11% of the UK's total electricity. So people are proud of that. But Britain's energy business coast is how the West Cumbrian coast is described. And historically, that has obviously been about coal mining, steel, and then more recently, Sellafield, who employs around 23,000 people. So you go to Whitehaven or Workington, the main areas, they are the main employer, Sellafield. And although offshore wind has been making an impact since 2006, their psyche is more around sort of nuclear. Along the Irish Sea, though, there is 10 wind farms. So just putting it into perspective. Next slide, please. So what is Project Collette? Well, it aims to be, meaning we're still very much in the very early stages, 1.2 gigawatts, which will be 80 to 100 wind turbines. It will go opposite Sellafield. Matt will talk about that in a minute when we talk about the feasibility study. The CapEx is absolutely ginormous, 3.3 billion. No, that's not monopoly money. And there we have the first community finance led. That's really always been the ambition. But hopefully, if it happens, it will be large enough to power over 1.2 million homes, save around 1 million tons of carbon dioxide, which would equal around 15 to 20% of Cumbria's carbon footprint. So right from the beginning, I mentioned our involvement with Arup, but also we've been involved with Energy for All. So it was very good to hear Zach's presentation. I think the first onshore community energy wind farm, Bay Wind, as Zach mentioned, was in Cumbria. So it's great to have that sort of relationship with Energy for All as part of our partnership. We've also been financially supported by Community Energy England Stage 1 funding. And then the climate change collaboration is actually the Sainsbury's Families Charitable Trust. And frankly, without those two helping us, because some people know we couldn't get this funded for 2 years. So they have really helped getting this project moving. Next slide, please. How much will it cost? Or perhaps a better way of saying, what is the investment opportunity? Bruce will go into this more, but actually, Matt, if you want to jump in there, because Matt actually did the finance model.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt Bleasdale. As Kira introduced, I did the feasibility study and finance model. How much will it cost? So it's very much at this stage, it's how long is a piece of string? And as I should imagine everybody will find, and everybody knows, the very earliest stages of a project are possibly the hardest. and raising the capital for that is the most difficult, the most uncertain. The uncertainties in offshore wind are very considerable at this stage. People might know about the difficulties in connecting to the grid, but on top of that, you have leasing of the seabed. So people have spoken about talking to schools and putting solar on top of schools or churches or whatever else it might be. That's great. There's loads of them around. Unfortunately, there's only one Crown estate, and they're the people who lease the seabed. And they'll make a decision as to when they want to lease the seabed and who they'll lease it to. In the previous commercial rounds, it's been extremely expensive, and really there isn't a strategy. If this were to go down the commercial leasing route that the Crown Estate holds. But with the advent of GB Energy and the Crown Estate working with GB Energy and a sovereign wealth fund, there is a strategy that could open up the bed to development of UK-owned offshore wind farms. And when people ask what does community mean, well, I think people understand that community can mean geographically local people, but it can mean people who have a common interest. And in terms of Project Collette, I think that really is where it comes into it, because it is a very significant piece of infrastructure with a high capital demand. It will rely on that wider concept of community, not only the local and regional communities, but also the UK-wide community. So the pre-development costs, like I said, how long is a piece of string? We set 5 million against it. There's a significant amount of upfront works in the origination of an offshore wind farm. The stage 2 development costs, typically costs across the industry come in about 100 to 140 million pounds. And that's reasonable. There's a significant amount of offshore surveys, development works, grid connection works to be done all at that stage. Engaging with suppliers, getting costs, and then of course moving into construction. Again, it's very expensive. £3 billion thereabouts is a good figure to be using. And then obviously operations and decommissioning is at a point where you're generating revenue, and it's revenue that comes from operating the wind farm that pays for the operational costs and the decommissioning costs. Kira mentioned I might talk about CFD. I'll probably stay off that. I really don't like it. It's a very bad strategy that the government has. It's how not to develop an industry and how not to develop projects. If you were to ask me, you pretty much couldn't get a worse piece of regulation or policy if you wanted to build a low carbon energy system. But there are people within government who'd argue with me about that.
Yeah, for another day. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Okay, so some of the thinking here, so rather than me read out every single word in the slide, I'm also sort of taking you through our thinking, because that is quite important to when you're trying to put together a business model or a finance model. But, obviously key for us is, because it's such a big capex, is what is the investment opportunity? So for wind, once operational, it's obviously quite now relatively mature. It's a stable investment, long-term cash flows. It also fits quite well with sort of pension funds and these long-term investors. It's an asset that is around 30 years. And the Crown Estate also has a very long lease term. So also look at some of those expected incomes. So they really are quite sizable. So look at that, 260 million. So this is industry standards to 630. So sitting nicely in the middle of around sort of 400 million every year is the possible income. Next slide, please. Now, what are some of the risks? Now, it always makes me laugh to read this because of course, people think maybe we haven't thought about these risks. Well, we have in our team, and that's Matt. He is our risk man. I mean, Matt will take any opportunity to tell us about the risks. We know this is very risky, but going back to that point about the investment opportunity, it is a sort of tried and tested risk. But getting that huge 5 million, so right for us right now to be thinking about getting that sort of pre-seed development 5 million, that's our biggest risk to go. As Matt said, the Crown Estate, the AFL, also a big risk. If the Crown Estate, if we aren't able to get through the auctioning process or other ideas we have for them, lots of risks in this early stage of the project. But importantly, local community is really something that is important to this project. And I will go on to talk about how we've engaged with them. Grid connections, I think Matt mentioned that, etc. Next slide, please. We also thought about the risk tolerance of the different types of investors, from institutional investors, I know you probably can't read that, infrastructure and private equity funds, corporate investors, social impact investors. So we thought about them in terms of their risk profile. So institutional investors, for example, they have a moderate risk tolerance, and they will tend to come in much later on in the project when the risk is lower. So that was quite important for us to think about the investors and their risk tolerance. And if you're interested, you can certainly look in our report. Next slide, please. So feasibility study, I'm going to very quickly say a few words, but this was what Matt did. So actually, Matt, why don't you talk about what you did? Much better.
Yeah, so we looked at the seabed off the coast of Cumbria. We looked at various things from water depth to seabed type to the grid in the local area, including ports, construction ports, and operation maintenance ports. The white outline that you can see there is the area that we generally looked at. The red outlines you can see are existing or planned offshore wind farms. So you might see that there's one extending into the white area down in the southwest of the zone. That's a planned offshore wind farm off the Isle of Man. When we looked at all the different data layers, we identified that it is feasible to come up with an offshore wind farm in the area. There are some key issues, technical issues that we'd need to get over. So, for example, exporting all of the power is a problem across the whole of the country. Any grid connected or even significant distribution connected projects will quickly run into challenges in terms of grid transmission issues. If you ask me, that's one of the policy and regulation issues that the government needs to get over. The trouble is aligning all of the different parties, so Ofgem, all of the existing generators, the distribution bodies, the National Grid Energy Transmission, and obviously the new National Energy System Operator, to make sure that the policies are able to solve these issues. And that's not simple. It's definitely going in the wrong direction at the moment, with projects being kicked off the connection register rather than the connection register being opened up to projects. And quite a lot of the technical solutions, such as upgrading distribution grid voltage, are not really being looked at. But that's, if we move on to the next slide, we'll see the output from the feasibility study, where you can see we identified an area about 20 kilometers off the coast of Sellafield, on a par with Sellafield, about 10 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers tall, which is about 1.2 gigawatts worth of generation, and sufficiently away from any of the existing or planned projects to make sure that there's no interaction or a industry standard recognized interaction between any of the projects.
Next slide, please. I think it's back to me there, Matt. Thank you, Bruce, for doing such a good job with these slides. Yeah, so this is really just about our thinking. And I just wanted to add a bit about why we chose opposite Sellafield. One of the issues, particularly in 2021, there was going to be an offshore wind farm in Maryport. the whole community up in arms. Absolutely not. Visual impact really was very strong. And opposite Sellafield, there's less houses there, as you can imagine. But also because they have a boiler, a CHP boiler, which is coming to the end of its life. So they could be quite an important off-taker for Project Collette, and it could be through private wire. So strategically, there's various reasons. And within our development strategy that we thought about, we thought of sort of all sorts of strategic aspects. So one of them was strategic off-takers. If Sellafield was to become a strategic off-taker, then it actually becomes a nationally important asset, because it would be keeping those sort of pondy water things with all those nuclear rods at a certain temperature. We have thought right from the start that this could be a milestone project for GB Energy, but also how could it also impact the UK regionally and nationally? We'll go into that later. Is there an opportunity to be working with local authorities and the National Wealth Fund? Next slide, please. So community engagement. So we've done quite a lot of work actually, and big thanks go to Cumbria Action for Sustainability. We did a survey and we interviewed 578 people, and that was done sort of face-to-face, but also online. And we asked them various questions. Now, I mentioned over there in West Cumbria that they tend to be more sort of focused on nuclear than renewable energy, but actually 48% thought that renewable energy is important, and 36%. So add those two together, that's, someone can do the maths quickly for me, 82%. So we asked them, would they support a proposal like Project Collette? 64% said they would, so good numbers there. Would they consider investing in a community-owned offshore wind farm? 32% said yes, so that's a third. That's not massively high, but that's certainly something to work on. Next slide. We also found that those over 50 were less supportive, those under 50 more supportive, but no surprises there. Concerns, visual impact. Some said there's already too many wind turbines. Others, we should be investing in nuclear, a preference for offshore rather than onshore. For them, what were the main benefits? Job creation, reskilling and training for jobs, and then discounted electricity. So really important feedback there. Next slide, please. We also got the feedback because there is proposals for a deep nuclear waste disposal. And actually, the decision will not happen until 2027, and it won't really happen until 2045. But a project like Collette, with its sort of 30-year lifespan, it needs to think about this. So that was very good guidance from the community, because where they plan to put it could go, into some of the areas where Project Collette will go. We also got very good feedback from the Marine Maritime Organization. And also people said, look, be clear on your story, be honest, and just tell people the journey as you go along. Next slide, please. Right, so over to Bruce. Thank you very much.
Hi there. So, so from my perspective, as I said, I've been working in different forms of renewable energy finance with retail investors, and I was really trying to help Project Collette think through the different options for using finance to bring the community into this project in a way that is appropriate to the different risk profiles that were identified on that slide, which had lots of different investors in it. And the local investors, ethical investors, green investors, from that experience working at the moment, I know that people have different risk appetites, different risk profiles, and different financial needs. And a big project like this, where we're raising large amounts of money, it has to consider that. But I think some of the sort of challenges, therefore, is that we've got very diverse levels of understanding of investment, and actually, compared to the population as a whole, the willingness to invest in renewable energy, that's probably higher than the population as a whole locally. But on terms of what we're also talking about here, as Kira's made clear, is this is very long time scales and changing risk profiles over the lifetime of those projects. And this is where we see the challenges that a lot of the decisions are made on a project at the early stages when the risks are greatest. And it's how does the community get a sort of meaningful voice and stake in those decisions, and how does it have that as a sort of right rather than a privilege? And I think you're also realistically having to align those community interests with significant commercial interests, with incentives and liabilities sitting on both sides of the fence. So what we're trying to do here is come up with structures that provide those mechanisms for the community to lead this project in the sense of being in the forefront of it and being involved from the start. And I think despite, when you first sort of approach this problem, it feels huge and big. A lot of the UK's infrastructure as a whole was underwritten by public subscription. So for 200 years we've been doing this. We just got a little bit out of practice. So one of the things that we've come forward in the report we wanted to highlight was our thinking in terms of what we've called the community integrated investment model. And integrated here is really to reflect the fact that there are a number of different ways that we can see the community getting involved. And it's really built around a number of structures, some of which we've already been talking about from the Energy for All presentation, working within the cooperative side of the sort of corporate structure approach, but also some new inventions. And these are mechanisms that allow us to offer these different types of investments. But the key point here is we try and make this something which is accessible for all based on their financial needs, their appetite for risk, their capacity for loss. So those best practices, particularly around community benefit societies, we've put those at the heart. There's also community municipal investments. Now these are a new old idea. Basically local authorities able to issue green bonds to fund projects in their local area, directly from local residents and others that want to invest. And the difference between those and community finance is the risk is lower. Your risk is the local authority and its ability to repay, and it allows a greater franchise of people to be involved in the funding. And also regulated crowdfunding, which is was my day job, and those mechanisms are also being developed to allow much larger scale amounts of money to be brought in under something called a new structure called the public offer platform, which is under development at the moment by the FCA, which would allow unlimited levels of crowdfunding. So I think also within this is the ability to bring those investors into the project as part of a joint venture with an entity such as GB Energy to secure that development finance and mitigate some of the risk. So it's really trying to find a structure that does the best of both worlds in terms of that. So in terms of the model elements that we put together, and I won't, as the next slides have lots of arrows and diagrams on them, and I'll try and simplify them. But at the core, the beating heart of this is the use of a community benefit society, which I think offers a great deal of flexibility, both in terms of the way it can raise finance from the community and also the way it can invest into the project at the different stages. We've also put forward ideas for local authority securities, which could be issued by the authorities local to the project, local to the coast, direct to their community, and providing them with the mechanism to raise finance and invest in this project, and either generating return for themselves or supporting the project with concessionary forms of finance. And lastly, as I said, the public offer platform. So this is when we're talking about raising numbers such as 3 billion, the public offer platform is designed to do tens, if not hundreds of millions through a structure into private companies, private project finance projects. That's what it was designed to do. And in one of my other roles as head of UK crowdfunding, we're trying to work with the FCA to make sure that's a model that works for small investors as best as possible. So just to kind of summarize on this, so what we can see here is sort of the 4 stages which were described by Matt and Kira in terms of pre-development through to operation. And what we've tried to do here is to allow the community to come into the project from stage 1. Now, obviously, that is when there is the highest risk, but they're also the highest opportunities for reward. And these are often rewards that are missed by communities. And there's also a narrative that says that maybe communities should not be exposed to that risk. So it's also about making sure that if communities are taking part in that risk, the people who are doing it are the people who've got a capacity for loss, because there's, up until the end of stage 2, there is a binary potential for an outcome of loss, i.e. it'll either go ahead or it won't. If it doesn't go ahead, there's no value. And in each one of these stages, we're wanting to make sure that we've got a meaningful level of ownership, because a lot of the significant decisions, both in terms of the way the project's put together and how it is planned, and therefore some of the economic benefits and how they flow into the community, that is when they're being made. So we really want to try and build the community into that early stage. As it moves into construction and operation and the risk profile changes, that's when it's opportunity to bring in other sorts of investors into the mix, and extend that ownership as wide as possible, really to show and allow more of the investment returns to flow back into both the pockets of UK citizens, but also the UK economy. And what we've been working through is how that structure sort of evolves through those different levels. And also, yeah, some jargon in here as well, which apologies for, but there's a lot of stuff to fit onto these slides. But what we're looking at here is having a project SPV which is invested in by the Community Benefit Society alongside potential state public funding, either through raising a community municipal investment or working with GB Energy, and different forms of membership who are supporting the Community Benefit Society, ranging from local members who may just be subscribers all the way through to investors at different levels, through to, as Matt said, that broader community of interest. And working through the project SPV is where a lot of the sort of the work of the project is done, funded by those different entities, but ultimately also controlled by and influenced by the membership of the Community Benefit Society as much as possible. And as that goes into sort of more complex stages, that structure then grows. And just in the interest of time, I thought there was one more, but anyway, there's that structure then gets more complex as we move into the construction operation. And there it's moving into structures around the SPV, which is ensuring that the risks and liabilities that are starting to develop are mitigated for the community in some way. And also at this stage of development and planning, where it reaches that successful phase, is a significant uplift in the value of those shares and the value of that project. And here it's really seeing how the Community Benefit Society is then able to channel a significant and lasting financial legacy for the Northwest in terms of some form of community wealth fund, which is generated from those profits. Because obviously, as shareholders in the Community Benefit Society, the social investors are not making a speculative return. They're making an investment to generate a social return. And that's the really important principle that drives the Project Collette model. So I will.
Great. Thank you.
Apologies,
Thank
that was
you.
a rattle through. I'm sure there'll be questions.
No, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Bruce, and also Matt. Now, you may well be sitting there down in the southeast or wherever you are and go, well, is it only Cumbria that's going to benefit? Well, not necessarily. And we'll just go into that in a bit now. So we spoke about that sort of 5 million pre-seed. And so we've had to sort of get a bit creative. So what Bruce was talking about, Bruce and Mark have thought about that very structured approach to getting this high level amount of money in. But we need to think about that 5 million. How are we going to do it? So one idea is Colin with 2 L's, to go with Collette with 2 L's. And this is what we're calling the sort of the staircase approach, which would be to invest at a more local level, refinancing of existing renewable energy opportunities. And it will mean that we can create this sort of community of investors, and they don't necessarily need to be from Cumbria at all. We need to look into this idea more, but Colin will help us get to Collette, simply put. And in our next phase, that hopefully will get funded, we will look into this idea more. Next slide, please. So actually, this is what I love. I really do. I really got get excited about the Sea Lords of the West. Now, this is really where Project Collette becomes national. Next slide, please. And Sea Lords of the West means two things. So it could mean that, you know, suddenly we just find out that we cannot finance this in the way we want it to, or Crown Estate will say to us, look, let's make it easier for you. Now, Matt doesn't think this is going to happen, but maybe they say, we can offer you the opportunity to become a sort of sublease some of the seabed, and you take it on and you receive rent from developers, and it becomes a community asset in that way. Now, that would really take away all of this risk that we've been speaking about, but the likelihood of it happening probably are quite low. But if it did happen, the reason why we're calling it Sea Lords of the West is that that the entity becomes a sort of a sea lord rather than a landlord, and a percentage of that would go into a national community coffer. And go back to the Irish Sea, which is very interesting, because I think there are 5 or 6 countries along the Irish Sea, from Scotland to the Isle of Man to Wales to Ireland to England itself, and lots of coastal communities. So in terms of our target audience, all of those coastal communities could do with a bit of community benefit or whatever they would get from this type of structure. So we think there's lots of interesting things we can do here. We'll explore them more in our next phase. But another Sea Lord aspect could be going back to what Bruce was talking about with these sort of council bonds, these community municipal investments, to go down the route where the local authorities, because of their community bonds, they become the Sea Lords. So lots of things for us to explore. Right now, they're just ideas, but we are looking at the possibility of Project being most definitely a nationally community-owned asset. Next slide, please. I think we're coming to the end now. I think we should get to the end. So thank you very much. Is there any questions? Sorry, very sorry about the beginning of this presentation.
Thank you so much, all three of you. That was really interesting. Lucy, has there been much coming up from the chat? And also just people
I've
can
only
raise their
seen
hands.
one question so far. Are there tax incentives, such as the enterprise investment allowance?
Not for energy projects at the moment. It's an overhang to when energy projects had feed-in tariffs, and it's never been corrected since. It was seen as a double subsidy. So no, but the bonds are eligible for the Innovative Finance ISA, which is a tax benefit for individual investors.
Okay, another question from Richard. What's the CHP in, I think that should be Cumbria Sellafield?
Stand for combined heat and power boiler.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry to follow up that question. I was just wondering, why there's this HB in that site, and if it come offline, and how would the offshore wind farm energy can support the heat generation?
Yes, that's a very, very good and technical question, and it will be something that Arup have looked into already in more detail, but we don't have the answer right now, because first of all, we need them to agree. And I've had some initial conversations with them, and they are looking into all sorts of different solutions, but they don't tell too many details, as you can imagine. But that will go into our next phase, where if they are interested, then we would obviously work more closely with them. At the moment, it's just for us, they are an interesting and important off-taker.
Right. In terms of energy uptake, not heat, just energy, using the energy to generate heat.
Yes, at the moment, yes.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, question from Ned. We see growing public resistance to the onshore infrastructure associated with offshore generation. Is that an issue for you, or do you see community ownership as a way to overcome resistance?
It's a very good question, Ned. And do you know what? I don't think I'm going to give you an answer because we need to think about it.
You want me to pick up on that, Kira?
Yeah, Matt, why don't you do that?
Yeah, so there definitely has been community resistance, especially in East Anglia, to the onshore infrastructure. So cables and onshore substations, as I said, with offshore wind farms. Obviously, all of it is very localized, and so dependent on that local the local community and their view on it. It's also dependent on the design of it. So, for example, the very first project I work on, London Array, had the local community objecting to the local onshore substation, which then led to a design competition, made a feature of the onshore substation, which was possibly a bit of a mistake on the local community's part. But it is a very variable thing. And yeah, you can have onshore infrastructure from offshore wind farms, or you could have onshore wind farms. Now, which do people prefer? Or onshore solar plants, or onshore nuclear power stations? It is all a matter of making decisions.
Do you want to add anything, Kira?
No, I think Matt answered that perfectly well. From Diana, how many are involved in the project? So we have, as a core team, 4 of us who've been working on the finance side. There has been 4 additional people working on the stakeholder engagement, and then we've got all sorts of people that sort of are pitching in. So Britain's Business Energy Business Coast Cluster, they help with organising webinars and things for us. So it's sort of growing in numbers, but we haven't had the biggest grant, I must say, these 2 things. But I think we've done a lot with the grant, and just keeping that community, our own community, whatever definition you want to call it, is really an important part of this project.
Okay. Another question from Kieran. What has been or are your primary routes to market when it comes to gaining investment and investors?
Very good question. Bruce, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So I think for each of the different types of investment we've got, there are different routes. So I think the Community Benefit Society, I think as explained from Energy Fool's perspective, that's mainly focused around communication and building a community locally. The community municipal investments, that's a route to market to raise the low risk bonds to a broader group, and also to reach lower income groups than get reached normally through community energy projects. And those are raised and issued and communicated through the local councils. And then on the national basis, then that's really about using, in the main, probably the more regulated crowdfunding platforms where there's potential for managing and running much larger, in the thousands investor structures, and also bringing things like secondary market to support that distribution. That's also something, just to pick up on the question about Colin that's come next, which is that's about part of that is actually creating people or helping people understand the benefits of investing in renewable energy, which, as you've all know, they've spent 20 years building that group, building that community, but it's still not the majority of people out there. And we've got a big job to do to educate people as to how it works, what the benefits are, and why it is a good thing to have for some of your money if you've got an investable cash to put to work. So that's something that I think within Colin, where we're taking on and financing assets locally, which was done more recently by
the core model.
Yeah. Sorry, Kira.
No, you're explaining it well. But actually, Dave, I'd love to talk to you about Colin more. But yeah, so it is a sort of a refinancing model of existing renewable energy projects. And we haven't yet done deep enough research. We've literally just thought about it. We've done, a concept paper, but we need to look more into it along with the Sea Lords of the West. But yeah, Dave, if you've got any time, I'd love to be able to chat with you a bit more about that. And it's actually in the report, so I can send you a link right now to everyone of the report. Just do mind the typos. They'll be fixed by next week. There's not many. Is there any other questions? Someone asked, planning to
planning.
Yes. Do you
Shall
want
I
to
pick up on that? Yeah, so yes, Collette would most definitely be in a significant infrastructure project, and therefore go through the planning process for that. So through the planning inspectorate. Whether that means that it's less liable to local objections, I personally wouldn't say that it's less liable to them. They're very, very stringent requirements on going through the infrastructure planning project process, and you do have to take into account all of the feedback from the local community and the local objections. And each one of those is categorized into a particular objection, and those objections are dealt with in the same way as they're dealt with on a local level. But yeah, it will definitely take a significant amount of time. It leads into the question of what the timescales are. So there are changes afoot in terms of the planning process, which means it's very difficult to say how long it will take for it to go through. But for an example, 2 years of data is typically required at the moment for doing your assessment, environmental assessment, before you then get into the planning process. So 7 years is not an unfeasible minimum timescale.
If I could just finish, I think we're probably over time now, but I just really wanted to thank Bruce and Matt and everyone who's helped us. And I remember when Rebecca Willis, who some of you may know, she wrote about Project Collette in The Guardian. And the first person to contact me was someone from Cornwall saying, well, what about us? And, what about a community wealth fund? So Bruce touched on that. And we really will be thinking about, if this is in Cumbria, how it can become a national asset. How can people throughout the UK benefit? Could there be a national wealth fund? All of this is yet to be thought about. We have done as much and more actually with our funding. So I do want to say thanks again to the team, because we put a lot of time into this. And thanks so much to Megan for the opportunity to speak to you all. In fact, this is our first presentation. So thank you very much, and to Lucy as well.
Thank you so much. That was really great. Just a quick question to you, Kira, is if people want to sort of be kept up to date, what's your sort of plan for future webinars? Is there a way that they can find out about that?
Yes, so our website is greenfinancecommunityhub.co.uk/Project Collette, all one word. We've got a link where you can sign up to a newsletter, so that will put you onto our database. And our hub has a webinar on December the 18th at 11 o'clock. And you will see on our website in the events page, and you can sign up there. But otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and the email is collette@greenfinancecommunityhub.co.uk. And it's, Dave, can't wait to speak to you. You guys, you really know your community energy. We've got lots to learn, and sharing of best practice is really very important.
Great. We'll put some of those details in the follow-up email with the slides, just if people want to know a bit more and stay up to date with Project Collette. I just wanted to end really quickly. I pulled together a few. So the report that Kira shared in the chat is on the slides too. And also just highlighting that an old project that CSE was part of with a number of other organizations was called Next Generation, where we ran an innovation fund looking at different business models. And so if you go on the website, you'll be able to see example financial plans and business models and reports from all those projects. So not all of them were successful, but I think there's some good learnings from there. And we also have some webinars that cover things like the low carbon hub model that was mentioned in the chat earlier, as well as other topics like energy markets and things like that. I've also highlighted Community Energy England's pages on funding and share offer and investment options. and Community Energy London have recently seen. For those who are sort of just getting started in community energy, they've got some really good project guides as well. So yeah, these are just the starter for 10. There's probably a number of other resources, but just highlighting those. And just before we end, our next webinar will be our final webinar in this project, will be on the 10th of December, which is all about community transport projects. So if any of you are interested in learning about how community transport can happen, please come to that. So we're going to hear from Silverdale Parish Council that have received Community Energy Fund funding to develop a community public transport service in their area. And also we'll hear from Charge My Streets as well. So yeah, please sign up to that if you're interested in find out more. And I think Lucy popped a feedback survey link in the chat, and we'll also send this by email as well following the session just now. So if you could please take a couple minutes before you continue your evening to provide us with some feedback, that would be amazing. And I'm going to end there. So thank you to all our speakers, and thank you all for coming today and taking your evening to learn about this very fascinating and complex topic. So thank you so much, and take care, everybody.
Thank you very much, Megan.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers all.